Good evening, everybody. Hello. Thank you very much, Alex. It's very odd, somebody talking about you in your, in that sort of way. But thank you very much. So I'm not going to do the TED Talk thing and sort of wander around. I'm going to learn from Mr. Miliband because we don't want to miss anything out. So I'm going to be giving a proper lecture from pieces of paper. What's also really, this is a first for me, obviously, giving a lecture as this inaugural professorial lecture, but this is also a first for me because for the first time ever, my husband is actually in the audience, and he never ever comes to anything where I speak. So this is a first for all of us. Yeah, so I'm much more nervous about my husband listening to me than I am actually about the rest of you. So this evening I'm going to be talking about the contribution of creativity and creative businesses to growth and prosperity, the difference between those two concepts, and how we can ensure that the creative potential that is latent in our towns and cities is extracted to not only deliver greater economic good, but also to make us feel better about ourselves too. So to do this, we're going on a short journey that will see us lightly touch on banking and finance, the lessons we can learn from Christopher Columbus and his experience of trying to raise money in the 15th century, and why it is that punk rock is at the heart of new economic thinking. So let's start with Christopher Columbus. Now, as many of you hopefully will know, Columbus came from Genova in northern Italy, which is also the birthplace of modern banking. Now, records show that Columbus did indeed appeal to the banks of Florence and Venice and Geneva, and asked them to fund his exploratory voyages. But he never quite managed to convince them to back him. Why would they? He had no idea at all where he was going. But instead, he received backing from Queen Isabella of Castile, what we would now call seed capital. And that sent him on his way into the relatively unknown. When I speak to many people who are setting up their own creative enterprises now, it seems to me that little has changed since the Renaissance. Their first port of call is often a bank, but they're usually turned away, and instead they resort to family, friends, and wealthy-ish individuals who know them, believe in them, and want them to succeed. How we back innovation and value creativity has not altered much in the last 500 years. And we need to address this pretty quickly, because although the UK might be growing faster than other parts of the world, indeed, as Mr. Osborne pointed out yesterday, most people in the UK certainly don't feel that they are experiencing prosperity. Over the last 100 years, each generation has been about a third better off than the previous one. And the key to this astonishing rate of growth has been investment. Now, as is common with most professions, most economists disagree with each other about most things. But even they agree on one central concept. In fact, everyone, from gardeners to politicians, must surely agree on one thing. You can't get something out if you don't put anything in. The often quoted example, of course, is China. In the early 1990s, the GDP of China was roughly equivalent to the GDP of Italy. But since then, China has invested in double-digit numbers, heavily investing in its infrastructure, its research base, and its businesses. Italy, however, in contrast, has invested at less than 2% on an annual basis. Today, China's GDP is 7 times the size of Italy, and China creates an economy the size of Cyprus every week. Now, if you were a gardener, you wouldn't expect anything to grow unless you'd exposed your seedlings to the sunshine, you'd put in a little water, maybe given your soil some food, even the odd word perhaps when no one was looking. But it seems we don't extrapolate this lesson when it comes to business. Yes, we talk about the importance of investment, but our commitment at the end of the day is often lackluster and insubstantial. This is particularly true if you are in the business of creativity. Many parts of the creative businesses are a hits business, particularly the ones I'm involved in: film, TV, video games. They're often characterized as being notoriously risky, Just because Tom Hooper had a hit with The King's Speech, it doesn't follow that he's going to have a hit with his next film. Incidentally, for those of you who are interested, Tom Hooper's second film was Les Mis, which made 400 million at the box office as compared to his first film, which made 200 million. Anyway, the think tank Demos published a very interesting study in 2011, which examined the concept of risk in terms of investing in creative enterprises. And at about the same time, the University of Warwick published their research into the success or otherwise that creative businesses had accessing finance. What both reports uncovered was really quite startling. They found that on average, creative enterprises had lower failure rates than businesses generally across the economy. But yet they had significantly more difficulty raising investment because of this widespread perception that they were somehow more risky. Since 2012, the government has published statistics that demonstrate the creative industries have been growing faster than almost any other sector. It's also growing faster than the economy as a whole by quite some margin. However, despite all of this research and evidence, valuing the creative industries at £72 billion annually, that's £8 million an hour, my sense is that policymakers, they don't really quite believe that these businesses are the new drivers of growth. And if you tell them that ideas, passions, emotions, and self-expression are where our future investment needs to go, they would nod politely and they'd never return your calls. We've got a very odd idea of what constitutes risk, and I would contend that we also have a very odd idea of what constitutes investment. Those of you who work in the, those of you in the audience who work in the arts and cultural sector will no doubt be very familiar with the arguments you need to make on the economic importance of the arts. It's the way in which you can secure future funding for your work and protect the sustainability of the organisations and programmes you've worked so hard to build. I get that. But I also believe that it's important to acknowledge that sometimes we don't know what the outcome is going to be of a play we develop, a film we produce, an exhibition we curate, or a voyage we embark on, going back to our friend Christopher. When a person starts out on that act of creation, economic impact isn't usually at the forefront of their mind. And a good job too, because if we all knew where we were going, I'm sure we'd never get anywhere, and we'd certainly never get anywhere interesting. At the end of the Second World War, John Maynard Keynes argued that the best way to get the UK economy going would be to ask the Americans to bomb factories in the UK at an hour when the directors were sitting and no one else, because how else are we going to regain the exuberant inexperience which is necessary for success? The start of many creative businesses utterly encapsulates that concept of exuberant inexperience, and in many ways they operate a perfect textbook business. They buy low, i.e. ideas which cost nothing, and then they seek to create value and sell high. But because ideas are intangible and unique, you can't touch them and it's difficult to resell them, they feel much riskier than, say, an investment in a shop or a central heating widget, even if the evidence in front of you shows that these investments might be just as risky. So there you have the dilemma. How can you raise investment for something that doesn't exist yet, and should you go bust, your investor or lender has nothing tangible they can resell? For many years, there has been a public discussion on the scarcity of finance and how we can get banks to lend to needy businesses. We've all heard it. It's been in the press all the time. However, I would contend that the principal problem we face is more to do with a lack of understanding than an inherent lack of money. There is also an inbuilt fear within many institutions, not just financial institutions, but also within our cultural institutions, our government, our professional services, our universities, to acknowledge that there are some things that we find difficult to measure and that we don't understand, but that which we believe will have some sort of payback. I think if Grayson Perry were here speaking, he'd call it something along the lines of vague, analytical-ish, feel-good, expected outcomeness. We know there's something there, we just don't quite know what. Basically, I think there is a lack of appetite to put money into something which one can't see, feel, or touch yet. And this is really quite astounding when you think about the bizarre financial products that have existed until very recently, many of which turn out to be basically betting on expected outcomes rather than anything you could ascribe real value to. Yet somehow we label Wall Street traders as creative risk takers, but the poet in the corner a waste of public money, and the gamer on his laptop a beer swilling, pizza chomping, violent cyber thug. I've been talking to lots of bankers recently about how to encourage more lending to creative businesses. And the good news is there does seem to be a clear desire within the banking sector to get to grips with how their organisations can adapt to a world where intellectual property and not physical collateral is the chief asset. To this end, a number of tools are currently being developed which aim to attribute value to intangible assets. Such innovations open up the possibility of insurance products, for example, to mitigate against the perceived risks of investing in IP, which in turn can create a secondary market for IP and in turn create more appetite on the part of banks and others to lend against IP, because more options become available in terms of where you can recoup if it all goes wrong. But what's really at the heart of all of this is confidence. It's about getting enough people to say it's okay, rather than any scientific evaluation or objective appraisal. In a nutshell, joint culpability and responsibility. Creative businesses have been operating ahead of the curve for many years, to a model which is now being adopted by mainstream businesses, to such an extent that we will soon cease to differentiate between a creative business and a business. All businesses will need to be creative to survive. For people like me, whose careers are founded on this differential, that might be a problem. But for the world as a whole, it's probably an excellent thing. The key trends that have evolved as a result of the internet, personalization and customization, interaction, immersion, the growth of analytics, and the exploitation and commercialization of real-time data, the integration of the online world and the offline world, and the ability of the crowd to leverage action are all driving massive shifts in our economy and in society and politics as a whole. We're moving from a traditional economy where efficiency and central control prevail to a creative economy which has trust, experimentation, cooperation, and crucially, creativity and collaboration at the heart of it. This has important consequences for that huge player in our economic ecosystem, money. It's taken me some time to understand the significance of all the clever people that I watch every night on Newsnight when they talk about the real economy. What the hell are they talking about? What is the unreal economy? Well, it turns out, because I've done some research on this, it turns out that the real economy is the one that you and I participate in. We buy stuff with money that we earn from making things or doing things or creating services, whereas the unreal economy is the financial economy, that part of our society that creates money from money. When so-called investment banking has turned itself into such an arcane and complex form of gambling and hedging that even the bankers themselves don't understand what they're doing, well, it's no wonder that the rest of the world has got to get on with inventing other investment tools and methodologies that have some relevance to the real world, real businesses, and real people. Digital disruption has enabled this new creative economy, and the business models that have underpinned creative and cultural production, exhibition, and distribution are quickly becoming the de facto models for business more generally. So what are these characteristics of the new creative economy? For a start, it has got rid of many of the prerequisites of the traditional finance economies, particularly central control and the middleman, those people who look to make a buck by controlling parts of the value chain. You can see this most starkly, perhaps, in the way in which YouTube disrupted the content market. So, Mr. Broadcaster, let's imagine I'm into running marathons, which I'm not, but let's imagine I'm into running marathons. I'm going to make a film about my love of marathons, and I'm going to put it on my Facebook page, and then my friends who are also into marathons will see that on my Facebook page, and they will watch it. And then YouTube will notice that I'm getting lots and lots of hits, and then Nike will be in touch and they'll put an ad before it, and then before you know it, I'm generating enough revenue so that the next time that commissioning editor bumps into me, they'll say, come and have a chat about your next film. And I will be able to say, no, thank you, I don't need you. I can do this on my own. The other characteristic of the traditional economy is its focus on ownership. As we share and collaborate more, what we see is a growth in the desire for access rather than ownership. Spotify is a great example, where you buy to use something, in this case music, but don't require the physical good itself. And you can see this through the rise of the poster children such as Uber and Airbnb, who are all, dominating the sharing economy now. Crucially, what the creative economy does is it solves problems and it puts serving you at the heart of its endeavour. So to be successful, businesses must sit alongside the customer and either create or participate in an ecosystem to keep those customers. Again, it puts communication and collaboration, the meat and potato of creativity, at the centre of business development. Apple have done this brilliantly, initially through the creation of physical products such as the iPod, and then through the launch of connected services such as iTunes, the App Store, and soon iPay. So if the macro picture is that our traditional economy is migrating to become a creative economy, and creativity is slowly but surely mainstreaming, what am I doing running an organisation whose focus is keeping the distinction between creative businesses and other types of businesses? Well, the fastest rate of growth in the creative economy is now in the business-to-business and crossovers, illustrated by Creative England's own investment and partnership models. The thinking of creative businesses is colonising the whole of the economy, and it needs to. And what's more, it needs more people to stand up and start talking about the importance of investing in ideas and persuade others who have the power in our community and our economy to get with the programme. Digital technology means that people are no longer passive consumers and can see what's going on. Institutions can no longer hold on to total power. As we move up Maslow's hierarchy, we desire not only food, shelter and clothing, but an interesting and productive life. We want to be empowered ourselves, not just to exist, but also to be creative and fulfilled. Which brings me to punk. One of the creative economy's chief characteristics is its ability to help people help themselves. The accessibility of the internet-enabled world really does put more power into the hands of the ordinary Joe. Central to punk philosophy, however, is a distrust of establishments and institutions. But if we look back to the dark days of 2008, who did we look to when it all went wrong? We turned to government and institutions to sort out the massive calamity we found ourselves in. And to their credit, they appear to have done so. But because government and institutions now have to embrace a new way of working, they also have to submit themselves to the rigours of punk scrutiny. They have to address elitism and embrace transparency, all barriers to growth. If the key to future prosperity is trading in an international environment, then our government, cultural organisations, public bodies, financial institutions, and big business need to reflect that bigger picture in how they are constituted, who they employ, and how they engage. Companies and institutions that recognise the power of we will succeed. And that also means giving more financial firepower to citizens. We know that small amounts of capital make a real impact to an individual's efficacy to affect change and improve their own circumstances. What does this mean when it comes to harnessing the power of the creative economy? It means encouraging people to try things out. It means backing ideas, the success of which you have no way of measuring in advance. Our society needs to have the confidence to make the necessary investment in R&D to create those new opportunities. In our own small way, this is what the organisation I lead is seeking to do. Our focus is very much at the early stage of a business or an individual's career. It helps them take the next step from concept to prototype, proof of concept or pilot. We make small amounts of capital available for people to take risks, and we connect entrepreneurs, creators and producers to networks that will help them succeed. We are a national organisation that doesn't have an office in London. Our mantra is that talent is everywhere, and so that's why we based our offices in Bristol, Birmingham, Manchester, Sheffield and Brighton, and why we employ people who are spread out throughout the country so that we stay connected to the communities we are trying to support. Of course, we have the necessary checks and balances to ensure our investments are as impactful as possible. But truthfully, for me, it all comes down to the people you meet and whether you believe their idea and trust their ability to deliver. Think Queen Isabella, Christopher Columbus, and leap of faith. It is an art and not a science. Though my finance director will probably shoot me for saying this publicly. So what to do? What can we do to build on the competencies and characteristics of the creative industries and creative endeavour, such that it produces not just growth, but prosperity as well? And how can we build and develop our institutions so that they can support individuals and businesses to flourish and not be held back by barriers such as elitism and a lack of access to capital? I would suggest we confront and address a couple of myths. The first myth is that banks are not in the business of growing other businesses. I think the majority of the British public believes that the job of banks is to help people buy homes, look after their money, and help businesses to grow. But their business is the same as any other business, to grow profit and maximise shareholder value. The second myth is that taking risks is the job of venture capital. Well, that's not their job either. Their job is to get the maximum return as quickly as possible from the money they invest. This intrinsic motivation subsequently leads them to be pretty risk adverse. So whose job is it? The economist Mariana Mazzucati's excellent book, The Entrepreneurial State, addresses this question head on. She demonstrates that it is risk-taking by government agencies and not entrepreneurs, banks, VCs or big business, which has nurtured almost all of the key technological advances of the last 100 years. Mazzucati's most stunning evidence centres on Apple's hugely successful family of iProducts, which are often held up as the icons of disruption and the result of the genius of Steve Jobs. But as Mazzucati demonstrates, the 12 different technologies integral to the creation of these products were all developed through public research and development efforts. For example, Siri, the voice technology, has its genesis via a contract between a US Defense Research Agency, DARPA, and the Stanford Research Institute, and it was designed to develop a computerized assistant for military personnel. I think it's time to get rid of this ridiculous discursive dribble of public bad, private good, intervention bad, free markets good. Surely in the real economy and the real world that we operate in, we operate on a continuum that fluctuates between these two poles. The UK's world-class reputation for creative excellence is the result of a complex, interwoven ecology of public institutions, private businesses, education and public policy. We should be bolder about the role of public investment as an essential foundation on which our future economic health is built. And if we believe, as indeed the evidence suggests, that the creative industries are a significant driver of that future wealth, we need to invest the necessary research and development into them. I know it's essential we invest in our health services, our schools, and we get our rubbish collected. But it can't be an either-or question. If we don't invest in our creativity, we undermine our position on the world stage and our future economic viability. Fundamentally, this means backing ideas and taking risks. And we've just ruled out several players routinely cited as backing risk because they just don't. However, one fabulous result of the digital era is that it has given birth to a new set of saviours, us, the public. The explosion in the alternative finance sector fills me with positivity because it represents proper fiscal democracy. The ability of the crowd to back an idea and put their own money at risk is one of the most interesting disruptions to the modern finance paradigm. Whether we are talking about peer-to-peer lending, donation and reward-based funding, or equity investment via crowd platforms, the statistics are impressive. Last month, the innovation charity Nesta and the University of Cambridge published a new report called Understanding Alternative Finance. Catchy. This report shows that the UK alternative finance market has increased from 267 million in 2012, 2 years ago, to just under 1.74 billion by the end of this year. Once the public starts to see under the covers of the financial system, surely it is only a short time before they vote with their feet and become more active with the investment of their assets. Thanks to the internet and social media, it's easier to find and connect with people who align with your interests and share your passions. It means more effective and efficient ways of reaching the right people who are willing to back the projects that they believe in. In 2012, the London Olympics created an amazing opportunity for the world to experience the creativity and ingenuity that has made Britain one of the greatest worldwide hubs for culture, creativity, and innovation. And as a nation, we are known for having the courage to think the unthinkable, from inventors such as John Logie Baird, who invented the TV, through to Tim Berners-Lee and Trevor Bayliss's wind-up radio. The UK has an impressive history of initially balmy but very quickly profitable inventions. However, we can't be complacent. So here is my short and sweet manifesto to ensure we embrace a growth strategy that builds on these assets and our natural capacities, that is good for the whole country and not just one part of our community, and which recognises that talent is everywhere and often just needs a small helping hand to help it fly. Number 1, embrace your inner punk. Shout louder and be bold. Whilst we obviously need to continue to lobby for change within our public and private institutions, the best thing we can do is take our customs somewhere else or do it ourselves. At Creative England, we're actively exploring how we harness the power of the crowd to inform our investment decisions. For example, we've started very small by co-funding a number of games projects via the crowd, and we'll soon be doing the same for short films. Our intention is not to cut out other financiers, but hopefully, by demonstrating consumer buy-in, more traditional lenders and investors will be encouraged to think harder about the value of those propositions. Number 2, we need to recognise a good thing when we've got it and make it work for us. We must find ways of encouraging IP to remain in the UK. Whilst we've been good at commercialising our ideas, UK creators often aren't great at reaching scale. This is partly because of the size of our domestic market, partly because we tend to sell our stakes early, and partly a lack of available finance in comparison, for example, to the US, where investing to produce scale is much more commonplace. How can we do this? Well, I think the current tax credits for film, TV, video games, and theatre, and the recently announced tax break for children's TV are excellent in attracting inward investment. But in order to ensure that UK companies build their own value, I would advocate a tax regime that incentivises investment in intangible assets. How? Well, perhaps by rewarding IP that is retained in the country for a minimum period of, say, 5 years. This approach would encourage more investment, give companies enough time to really establish scale, and recognise that future economic growth will be based on IP development and exploitation as we transition to our creative economy. And finally, number 3, we must take risks, follow our gut instincts, and encourage those holding the purse strings to follow suit. We must appreciate the importance of investing in research and development as it relates to creative ideas, and find better ways to systematise risk-taking. We have to learn to be more comfortable with going on a journey whose end we are not clear on. The UK has been massively disadvantaged by a system in which Whitehall has failed to trust local or regional government outside of London, and where our leading public institutions and the financial community has allowed itself to believe that the rest of the country will come to them in London rather than reaching out to talented people and companies all over the UK. Everyone is now recognising that this urgently needs to be addressed, and that the power of government and the state has a role in addressing it. It may be hard to visualise George Osborne as a punk, but let's all hope that in his determination to redress the imbalance between South and North, between London and the rest of the country, he can allow a dash of punk philosophy to drive his policies. Be imaginative, be alternative, be counterintuitive, allow the exuberance of inexperience, trust the creativity of people, because that doesn't just build new businesses and new business methodologies. It will help to build stronger, more self-reliant communities and foster yet more of the creativity that we all like to think is one of the hallmarks of our country. Thank you.
Well, when someone kicks off their speech by linking punk rock to the economy, that's music to my ears. But what about you, though? Because for the next 15 minutes, this is your opportunity to put your questions forward to Caroline. You might have been thinking, I'm a new business. Very simply, what help is out there for me? You might be wondering that with all this talk about devolution and power going to the north, that actually you're fearful that funding is going to head that way as well. Whatever it might be, gather your questions now, because it's going to be over to you. I'm going to kick us off, though, just with a first question. I'm curious, Caroline, let's talk about the money. You mentioned some of the behind-the-scenes conversations a little bit. You said, talking to bankers. And I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about some of those behind-the-scenes conversations, who you're talking to, what kind of messages you're getting.
Yes, I have spent a lot of time with bankers, a lot. And it's really interesting, actually, because they're in a very difficult position, banks, in terms of all the things that they have held dear to, all of their business models are changing very, very quickly. And they are finding it very, very difficult to adjust to a world in which IP is the sort of central asset of a business. So but they're just not set up yet to deal with that. So the conversations are going very much like, how do we know if it's worth something? As I said in my lecture, can we resell it? And what are the things that one needs to put in place to what's the word I'm looking for? To sort of mitigate against the risk. So that might include, for example, introducing insurance products which insure against IP. If you do that, you can create a secondary market to resell that IP. But in order to do all of those things, the first thing you need to do is to value IP. So lots of banks are introducing different tools to measure the value of IP, and they're all very, very different. There isn't anything standard yet that exists. The Intellectual Property Office have been working on this for a couple of years, and they've a few months ago they published a really, really interesting report. Well, I find it quite interesting, quite dry, but it's called Banking on IP, which has a series of recommendations in terms of how banks can lend against IP. But despite all of that, I mean, I think the point I was trying to make in my lecture and what I found through all the conversations is that actually there isn't a silver bullet. You can have loads of methodologies, you can have loads of different tools. It really is about a desire to do that, and it really is about a culture change, and a culture change within our mindset about what risk is. Because risk is something that it's not something that sits outside of you. It's something that is you measure on a daily basis, don't you? And all sorts of things that perhaps might appear risky, it's the degree of risk, isn't it? It's the degree of risk and how much of that you can shoulder.
Yeah, and also the value that's placed upon it as well as a sector. So I wonder, in terms of, you mentioned conversations there with bankers, but what about politicians as well, and taking your manifesto to them? Any conversations you might have had?
Well, all the time. Obviously, I think that there's been a lot more rhetoric and a lot more public and political support for the creative industries. But there's still a transition to be made between that rhetoric and actually the policies that are there that can develop IP and creative businesses. So it's really interesting, that it is as I said, one of the fastest growing sectors. But within the Department for Business, there is one civil servant. God knows how many hundreds of thousands of civil servants there are. But there is one civil servant who has creative industries in her job title, and she is part-time. So in order to make that transition to action, you need to put in place a different sort of infrastructure. You need to recognise that the government programmes that exist, for example, to support businesses may not work for creative businesses. A lot of them will do, but some of them just need to be nuanced a bit. And you need to turn that machinery round so that it's, I think we've got a very old-fashioned idea of what business is and how you grow businesses, and it's very based around, manufacturing, utilities, etc., etc. But actually, for many young people leaving school, college, university now, they're much more likely to want to set up their own business than they are to go and work for a company. They're likely to have what's called a portfolio career. They need lots of different sorts of skills. And yet, a lot of the things that we're providing in terms of trying to support and grow businesses don't really fit that model.
Okay, just a couple of questions. I've got loads more, but I'd actually really like to hear from you. So we've got a microphone. Gentleman just there. It's Terry, isn't it? Can you say who you are and where you're from, please?
Yeah, my name's Terry Flaxton. I'm a professor of cinematography and moving images at University of West of England. So what I'm kind of interested in this is that when you get an issue like a notion like the IP of something, is inherently stealable. You fix it a little bit, and then it's somebody else's, and it can be sold off, and the Asian markets can grab it and all the rest of it. But what we could be doing is creating a combine of industrial productivity, of creativity. We could have a sustainable behavior and attitude towards the fact of our creativity. So instead of actually placing our value in the saleable commodities, which is also kind of a medieval concept, we can actually place our value in sustaining the creative combine that we are. Do you see the distinction that I'm trying to make? And do you agree or disagree?
So I think is what you're saying, that it's a cultural change. So it's not necessarily about protecting in order to achieve scale, but it's more about pooling our approach to combining our various ideas, our IP. Is that what you're talking about?
I'm saying that the picture that we have ourselves as a culture is that we are inherently creative, and the thing is that government doesn't necessarily recognise that at the moment. It's getting wind of it, but what we're doing and what you've been talking about is how to ring fence and protect IP. But actually, what we've got is the continuous creativity.
Yes,
so this is about sustainability.
Yeah, I think there's a sort of there's a virtuous circle, isn't there, really, which is that, without being too philosophical, creativity is as much about destruction as it is about creation. So you're constantly reinventing, you're constantly creating things, moving on and so on, and you have to keep that momentum. But equally, you have to create a way in which, if we're talking about making money out of things, you do have to find a way in which you can have frameworks that protect that commercial exploitation. Because otherwise, I don't see how you're going to invest in back in those things. Because so I'll just give you an example in terms of our model. We're not what's called a non-departmental public body. We're not one of those. We're a not-for-profit, but we work very commercially. So when we make an investment or we put some money into a company, we expect that back and some. And we expect that back and some, so that we can, not that we all go on lovely holidays or anything like that, or we take a dividend ourselves, but we put that back into the creation of something new. And I think it's how does one sustain that? And I do think that you do need tools and frameworks in order to be able to extract value, scale, and then collect.
Thanks very much.
Okay. Next question, gentleman at the back there, please.
Yes, hello. My name's Simon Bruce. I'm partner in White Bruce, firm of accountants. We work a lot with entrepreneurs and investors and startup businesses. Excuse me. I've completely forgot my question is, actually. I think it was to do with the legal framework and to do with packaging up ideas so that they are tradable. Do you believe that our current sort of the way that lawyers go about that is adequate and suitable at the moment?
Is it adequate? I mean, I think it's a very, it's a very specialist skill, isn't it? And I do think you are seeing the development of within a whole range of different legal practices of people who've got those specialist skills. You're also seeing that in banks. You are seeing, so for example, NatWest have started to employ much younger relationship managers, because a lot of the people that they had as their relationship managers had no concept at all of what the digital world was about. Lots of the businesses they talked to, they just couldn't get their heads around those types of businesses. And I think, sorry, I can't see that gentleman. And I think you definitely need specialist skills within legal practices. I think, again, it's without meaning to sound too fluffy. Again, it's a balance between having a lot of the lawyers that I've been talking to about IP protection. It's incredibly technocratic. And it's partly, yes, as I said, was just saying to Terry's question, that you need that framework. But a lot of it is about a cultural change and a cultural acceptance. There is a lot of talk about China, for example, and a real reticence with UK companies to work in China because of this perception that, and to some extent it's true, that IP isn't valued in the same way. Well, no amount of tools are going to change that. What needs to change is a cultural change, isn't it? And that cultural change comes by recognizing, as I think I've said, that you have to invest in order to harvest again. And therefore, you have to value that origination. What I find extraordinary about creative businesses is that people expect you to do loads of stuff for free, basically. Now, you would never think about going to a lawyer and expect to have a 2 or 3 hour conversation with them and for them to pitch you something about why they should work with, why you should work with them for nothing, would you? You just wouldn't. But when it comes to creative people, it's just expected that you will work, I don't know, you'll put a couple of days' work in to prepare something to go for a job. So I just think we have this really bizarre idea about, which is about value and how we value artistic creation, and sort of somehow different to proper stuff.
Okay.
David Parker from a company that makes TV programs called Available Light Productions. And the first thing, Caroline, is to say what a wonderful speech that was. I thought it was absolutely terrific, a really, really fantastic and inspirational piece, I thought.
Thank you, David.
What it didn't have is much about the place that you've just become a visiting professor of, the university sector. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on what the universities could be doing that they're not doing at the moment to support the sorts of ideas that were embedded in that lecture.
Okay, I think one of the themes is about collaboration. One of my themes has been about collaboration. And I think my experience of working with universities is that quite often, I get approached a lot or we as a company get approached a lot to work as universities. But we sort of once we've made a contact, we get nabbed by that particular contact and they don't want to share us. And actually, both from my organisation's point of view and a lot of the businesses that I work with, what they want is an engagement with that corporate entity. So what they would like would be to work with, yes, maybe the arts department or the video games department and so on, but they also would like to engage with the business school. They might also want to know more about what's going on in terms of the science and technology research and so on. So that sort of that collaboration, because lots of creative businesses, they have so many different facets to them. But one of the problems with universities, one of the challenges is how do you work across those disciplines? So I think that would be one of the first things I'd say. The other is about how businesses and universities engage. And I think that's really challenging, and it's something that, personally I've put quite a lot of effort into, and we've done quite a lot of research into, in terms of universities are amazing places for bringing people together and doing that initial networking. But it's very difficult to move from that stuff into a sort of a much more a much deeper collaboration. And I think when I think about other sectors such as advanced engineering, automotive and so on, they have got much more sophisticated relationships as businesses with universities because they're much more systematic about how they work with universities. And I don't think that's necessarily a problem coming from universities. I think it's much more a problem coming from our sector. And what I would say about our sector is that it's only recently we've started to think of ourselves in that more homogenous way. But we're not very good at talking with one voice. We're not very good actually at coming together around, 2 or 3 important areas. If Vince Cable wants to talk to the aerospace industry, he gets 5 fellas around a table. That's it. If he wants to talk to about car manufacturing, he gets 6 fellas, and they are all men, around a table. You talk about the creative industries, you're talking about hundreds of people, and so that I think it's much more difficult to bring that aggregation together. Sorry, I'm waffling.
Just a very quick one on that before we have the next question. For any students who might be sitting in here who haven't actually started necessarily their paid career working in the creative industries, just what would you say to them about making the most of any opportunities or creating them?
Well, grab everything you possibly can. Absolutely. So this is probably probably a slight negative, but there are a lot. It's very, very competitive, and but what distinguishes people is if they've got something to say. When I was for 100 years ago, I commissioned. I ran a series which was giving a platform to new filmmakers, and I would commission. I'd commission about 40, 50 maybe short films a year. And so I would see an awful lot of people who were sort of not fresh out of university, but they were quite newbies. And what was interesting was how many of them talked about wanting to be a director, wanting to be a writer. And actually what I wanted to hear is what they had to say. I wanted to hear what made them different. I wanted to understand about their intellectual curiosity. I wanted sort of chemistry and thought, but importantly, I just wanted them to say something, rather than be. And I think that's what I would encourage. I would encourage people to obviously get as much experience as possible. And I think there is a fine balance between, wanting to be a great artist and actually having a career. I mean, it's really interesting talking to lots of businesses. They might get a sort of a short film which is a wonderful it's a wonderful piece for them, but actually what they're looking for is somebody who can produce 23 minutes week in, week out, as it were. So there is that balance, but I think that is what's going to distinguish you in the long term, is if you've actually got something to say.
Okay, I saw another person with their hand up just over there.
Hi, Caroline. Anthony Story, and I'm an innovation strategist. I was, for want of another description, I do all sorts of things. I'd say what a lovely speech it was, but seeing as I do work for Creative England, it would make me sound like a creep. But it was very nice. So I was just interested on this aspect that actually the saviour of innovation is the public sector, and that there is and I just wondered.
I didn't think I said that. I didn't say the public sector.
Well, okay, not the saviour, but they were a champion, perhaps, and that the money that goes into investment and innovation is highly significant in the grand scheme of things, perhaps more so than the private sector. And I suppose I was just wondering, do you think the public sector recognises that in themselves?
No.
Do you think they're a bit scared of it because they're not proper business people and they're not quite sure what to do with it? And I just wondered, do you think they should shout more loudly and actually look at the impact that they have? Do they understand what they have?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, as I said, I think there's an awful lot of nonsense talked about who invests what, where. If you just look at another sector such as pharmaceuticals, big pharma companies don't invest in original research. They let universities do that, and then they pick the bits that are going to be most commercial, and they build on that. That's what they do. In terms of the role of the public purse in terms of investing in the creative sector, I suppose what I'm saying is that it needs to be. We need a mindset which is about our mission. If as the evidence shows that we do make money out of our creativity, then, you know, all of our public policy has got to surely pick up on that and respond. I was talking to somebody earlier about, I don't know, but 10, 12 years ago, when I was working at Southwest Green, I welcomed a delegation from Korea, the Korean Cultural Foundation, and a series of national politicians. And they came to look, they didn't come just to Bristol, they were in London and somewhere else, I can't quite remember. But they had decided that they were going to have a video games industry. They had nothing. And they decided they were going to have an animation industry, which is why they came to Bristol. And so I did, you know, took them around, I introduced them to people, I gave them loads of free advice and all sorts of stuff. You look at the Korean animation sector now, and you just look at what it turns over and how it has prospered, and it's doing brilliantly. But that's because they decided that's what they were going to do, and that's where they put their investment. And I just think we're just a little bit, we might do that, You know, we don't commit. We need to commit.
Okay, we're going to finish at past. It'd be nice, we've got lots of women in the room. Any of you got any questions? Gents have done really well, marvellous. This lady just down here, please. We'll just have a couple more quick questions, short answers, so we're done by 7:30. There's a chance for networking afterwards.
You talked about having spoken a lot to banks. I
Yes.
was worried, wondering...
You were worried?
Well, I'm worried, but also wondering what the response was from government, because I imagine most people in this room are quite receptive to everything you were saying. So, number one, have you made this speech to members of the government? What was their response? Because looking at the news every night, it seems to me that the government is moving in exactly the opposite direction from the one you're suggesting when you see the Minister of Education talking about, forget about the humanities, just do chemistry and biology.
Yes, I think that in terms of what's happening in education, then definitely there is a real move away from the arts. One of our board members is Ian Livingston, who who's famous for, he was president of IDOS, which is a big gaming company, and he talks about putting the A into STEM, to turn it, arts into STEM and turn it into STEAM. And with him, we are engaged in a conversation with government about the importance of the arts to the curriculum. So I think you're right in terms of education. In terms of business, the business department, I think they absolutely they absolutely agree with this. There is a real issue around the lack of money. There isn't, as Liam Byrne famously said, there's not a lot in the kitty really. And although I think things have shifted a lot, in terms of the support for Creative England, we've been incredibly lucky in terms of although we've worked very hard for it, in terms of having the resource from the public sector to invest in creative businesses. But there aren't very many examples of those sorts of funds going to the creative sector. So I think, yes, we are making that case. I do an awful lot of political, of advocacy on behalf of the sector. The Creative Industries Council, is taken seriously by all of those government departments. But as I said, do people really, really believe it in their guts? I still think we've got quite a long way to go.
Okay, and final short question from the gentleman just there.
Okay, I'll be as brief as I can. Robert Chapman, I'm a Chartered Surveyor, Property Advisor and Regeneration Practitioner. I wanted to pick up on your phrase, Caroline, talent is everywhere. Now, as someone who's involved in regeneration, yes, that means physical regeneration, but as per Professor Amartya Sen, it's also about human capabilities. And I'm interested in this idea about how creative industries can engage with deprived communities, areas or communities in need of regeneration. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that. So I would say that's absolutely where I have come from, really, in terms of my personal journey as somebody who set out working with people who came from, I hate to sort of use labels, but basically people who felt that they weren't particularly well represented by the mainstream media, helping them to tell their own stories, to represent themselves in their own words. So I think that the ability and the power of being able to tell your story, to express your story in whatever way, whatever medium, is absolutely fundamental to, to the things not just to sort of regenerating communities, but giving you, as an individual, a real sort of sense of efficacy. One of the projects I think that most exemplifies that in Bristol is Noel West Media Centre. I don't know if there's anybody here. I don't know if Penny or Carolyn are here from Noel West Media Centre, but what they have, for people who don't know it, it's a media centre that started basically in a sort of a couple of rooms in a centre in the middle of Knowle. They raised enough money to build their own sustainable building. They run all sorts of training courses for young people. They help young people set up their own businesses. They completely engage their local community, not just through self-expression, but also helping them to get jobs, etc., etc., etc. I mean, I think the sorts of things they do are a wonderful example of how you can, yes, you can engage communities, yes, you can help people to develop, but crucially, you can help people get into a career that maybe they probably thought they couldn't have.
Well, that's a great way to finish it. One question that might be hanging in people's minds, Caroline, punk rocker then, who was on your playlist or is still on your playlist?
Can I just say, by the way, in terms of punk, I was obviously far too young when punk first came around. So just want to clarify that. So I was a big fan of The Clash, local band-ish, sort of Somerset, Joe Somerset, or lived in Somerset. So The Clash was mine. Stiff Little Fingers, probably shouldn't say that in public.
Any fans out there? Yeah, good, there's one. Well, look, thank you very much for that and for all the questions that you fielded as well. So if you could show your appreciation in the usual way.